For decades, the United States saw Colombia as one of its closest allies in Latin America, especially in the fight against drugs. But today, that partnership is under serious strain. The US took the unusual step of revoking the visa of Colombia's President Gustavo Petro. The decision came after Petro openly called on US soldiers to disobey President Donald Trump. But what lies behind this clash? How did relations between the two countries deteriorate? And what role does Colombia's cocaine industry play in this tense story? Hello and welcome to Connecting the Dots. I'm Unman Bhattacharya. Let's connect the dots. The immediate trigger happened in New York. President Petro joined a pro-Palestinian protest outside United Nations headquarters. Speaking to the crowd, he made a dramatic appeal.
That is why, from here in New York, I ask all soldiers in the United States Army not to point their rifles at humanity, disobey Trump's order, obey the order of humanity.
The US State Department quickly condemned the comments as reckless and incendiary. Officials said Petro's call was an incitement to disobedience and violence. Hours later, Washington announced it would revoke his visa. Petro dismissed the decision, accusing the US of violating international law and insisting that he remained free to travel elsewhere. This incident came just days after Petro had used his speech at the United Nations General Assembly to attack US military actions in the Caribbean. He referred to American airstrikes on small boats suspected of smuggling drugs.
A criminal process should be initiated against those officials from the United States, including the highest-ranking official who gave the order, President Trump, who allowed rifles to be fired at young people who simply wanted to escape poverty.
For Petro, these strikes were not part of a genuine war on drugs. Instead, he said, they showed Washington's need to use violence to dominate Colombia and the wider Latin American region. He also warned that some of those killed may have been Colombians. For the Trump administration, however, the strikes were framed as part of a broader crackdown on narcotics. Officials argued that traffickers were sending cocaine and even fentanyl into the United States, fueling addiction and crime. At the center of the US-Colombia dispute lies one issue, and that is cocaine. Colombia is the world's leading producer of the drug. Coca leaves, grown in rural areas, are the raw material. Despite billions of dollars in US aid over the years, coca cultivation has continued to expand. The United Nations reported that coca cultivation in Colombia grew by 10% in 2023. Potential cocaine output reached record levels of more than 2,600 metric tons. The Trump administration blamed Petro, saying his peace talks with armed groups gave traffickers breathing room. The US logic was that when the government paused military operations to negotiate with rebel groups, those groups shifted their focus back to the cocaine trade. Without constant military pressure, they could expand their coca plantations, process more cocaine, and strengthen their smuggling networks. This month, Washington went further, placing Colombia on the list of countries that had failed demonstrably in the fight against drugs. It was the first time since 1997 that Colombia had been included. Petro pushed back strongly. He argued the surge in coca happened under his predecessor, Iván Duque. He pointed that his government had seized over 1,700 tons of cocaine since he took office in 2022. For him, the real solution lies not only in Colombia, but in the United States and Europe. Petro says demand for cocaine must fall if supply is to shrink. But how does Colombian cocaine actually reach the US and the rest of the world? Most of it leaves the country through three main routes. First, by sea. Speedboats and fishing vessels carry cocaine through the Caribbean, often to Central America or directly to North America. Second, by air. Small planes fly drugs out of jungle airstrips. And third, by land. Overland smuggling through neighboring countries before shipments head to Europe, Mexico, or the US. US agencies say many of the boats struck in the Caribbean belonged to powerful criminal gangs, including Venezuela's Tren de Aragua. But Colombian officials dispute those claims, warning that innocent lives may have been lost. President Trump claimed the airstrikes were necessary to stop the flow. But human rights groups and UN experts raised concerns. They warned the strikes in international waters amounted to extrajudicial killings. Members of the US Congress also questioned whether Trump had overstepped legal boundaries. President Petro has repeatedly challenged traditional US drug policy. At times, he has argued that cocaine is no worse than alcohol. He has suggested that legalization or at least regulation could dismantle global trade. In his words, cocaine is illegal because it is made in Latin America, not because it is worse than whiskey. He has also highlighted fentanyl, a synthetic opioid produced in laboratories, not Colombian fields, as the real killer of Americans. Now, this confrontation was only the latest chapter in a growing rift between Trump and Petro. Relations got off to a rocky start soon after Trump returned to the White House in January 2025. In one of his first policy moves, Trump ordered deportation flights carrying Colombians back to Bogota. Petro initially refused to accept the flights, saying his citizens were being treated like criminals. The standoff escalated quickly. Trump threatened tariffs on Colombian exports and cancelled visa appointments for Colombians seeking to travel to the US. Petro eventually backed down, but the bitterness remained. Since then, the relationship has only worsened. Petro accused US officials of plotting against him. Both sides briefly recalled their ambassadors. He also cut diplomatic ties with Israel in 2024 and halted coal exports to the country, distancing Colombia from Washington's foreign policy positions. It is not the first time a Colombian president has faced such a measure. Back in 1996, US authorities revoked the visa of President Ernesto Samper over allegations of cartel money in his campaign. But for Petro, the timing could hardly be worse. Colombia depends heavily on trade with the United States. It has also been a key non-NATO ally, receiving military aid and equipment for decades. Petro has also warned that Colombia would halt weapon purchases from the US if pressure continued. For President Trump, the fight against narcotics is central to his domestic and foreign policy. For President Petro, US strikes and threats represent an attack on Colombian sovereignty. The visa revocation may seem symbolic, but it reflects something deeper. The story of cocaine in Colombia and of the US efforts to stop it is more than a war on drugs. It is also a war of politics and power. But with relations at the lowest point in decades, the question now is whether Washington and Bogota can still find common ground, or if the divide will only grow wider. Thousands of Argentinians marching on the streets of Buenos Aires. They are all demanding justice for 3 young women. 15-year-old Lara Gutierrez, 20-year-old Brenda del Castillo, and 20-year-old Morena Verdi. Lara, Brenda, and Morena were brutally tortured and killed. The killers were so cold-blooded that they live-streamed their brutal torture and murders on Instagram to a private audience of around 45 people. Argentine media are reporting that the torturers cut off fingers, pulled out nails, beat and suffocated the victims. While Brenda and Morena were cousins, Lara was a friend of the 2 cousins. Their killings have deeply shocked Argentina. Family members of the 3 murdered girls are struck with disbelief. and desperately searching for answers.
The only thing I ask is that you help us investigate this to the end, because all I want now is justice. It's unfair to lay to rest two 20-year-old girls. It's unfair to see what they went through. It wasn't their fault.
Muchos vienen y piden justicia. No, yo pido verdad.
Many people demand justice. I don't. I demand truth, as truth is worth more than justice. Justice sometimes decide on one side or the other, but we are here for the truth, to know who was responsible for the crime. I did not see what they did. I saw it in a video when I was in Mexico, but still, we are here. Until we get the truth, we will not stop. The family is strong.
We are here to demand justice for the girls because what happened is terrible. No one has the right to kill anyone. We want this band of miserable people who did this to the girls to be brought to justice. We want justice and swift action to arrest all those responsible. Please, as a country, join us. What happened is terrible, and it happened to all of us, not only our family. It happened to us as a society, as mothers, daughters, and sisters. Please, please join us.
Here's what's known about this horrific triple murder so far. Brenda, Morena, and Lara were last seen alive at 9:30 p.m. on September 19th. Officials say the victims were lured into a van under the pretense of attending a party or an event, but were actually taken to a house in Florencio Varela, a suburb of Buenos Aires, where they were brutally tortured and murdered that night. Their bodies were found buried in the yard of the same house 5 days after they went missing. The dismembered bodies showed signs of torture. Officials announced on Wednesday that 4 people had been arrested on aggravated homicide charges. On Friday night, National Security Minister Patricia Bullrich said a 5th suspect, accused of providing logistical support with a car, was arrested in the Bolivian border city of Velazon. But the plot's alleged mastermind, who is believed to have orchestrated the killings, is still on the run. He is the suspected gang boss, a 20-year-old Peruvian nicknamed Julito or Little J. Authorities have circulated images of the fugitive leader and issued an arrest warrant against him. So why were the girls targeted? The 3 young women were allegedly killed in a revenge attack by a drug trafficking gang. The head of the criminal organization could be heard saying this in the live-streamed video. This is what happens to anyone who steals drugs from me. So the drug traffickers accused the victims of stealing cocaine and designed the brutal killings to send a public message about the consequences of defying the cartel's rules. One victim was reportedly buried in the patio of the house. The site was discovered after tracking the victim's mobile phone signals. The vehicle the 3 victims were last seen in was found burned out near the house. Police also found bloodstains nearby. It suspects the property was cleaned with bleach in what was an attempt to erase evidence at the crime scene. According to authorities, the women had previously been in contact with the members of the drug trafficking organization. The Buenos Aires provincial government classified the murders as femicide. It put out this statement: femicides are the most extreme expressions of gender-based violence, and in the context of narco-criminality, they represent a stark and brutal display of dehumanization, cruelty, and disposability. So the killings are being seen as a form of narco-femicide. It's a violent expression of gender-based violence linked to drug crime and cartel intimidation. The drug gang behind the murders of the 3 Argentinian girls is believed to be part of an international narco-trafficking network. As per investigators, it is a transnational drug cartel that uses Argentina as a transit hub for moving narcotics and uses locations near Buenos Aires as operational sites. Remember, Argentina serves as a strategic transit hub for drug cartels moving cocaine and other narcotics from Bolivia, Peru, and Paraguay through Rosario, which is Argentina's major port city, and a drug trafficking epicenter to international markets, including Europe. The triple murders highlight the growing influence of drug gangs in the region and the use of social media for terror and control. And what are the protesters asking for? They are demanding significant legal and social reforms in Argentina that can combat gender-based violence, drug gang impunity, and systemic failures. Remember, shortly after assuming office on 10th December 2024, Argentinian President Javier Milei had promised to treat drug cartel members as terrorists. And in August 2025, his government formally designated Cartel of the Suns, a Venezuelan-linked drug cartel, as a terrorist and narco-criminal organization. This aligned Argentina with international and US actions against drug trafficking organizations. But the latest incident shows that much more needs to be done. In fact, President Milei's administration faces strong criticism from protesters and media figures for rolling back legal protections and institutional resources dedicated to combating gender-based violence and femicide. Critics say this has weakened the institutional and legal framework for fighting gender-based violence in Argentina. So let's see the big picture here. The big picture points to the pervasive influence of drug cartels in Argentina. These cartels operate as parallel power structures. They enforce violent social control, especially over women in communities they dominate. The big fish behind this atrocity are the drug cartel leaders and organized crime syndicates that control drug trafficking routes and territories in Argentina and the broader region. These criminal organizations maintain their power through violence and fear. Some state institutions in Argentina either collude with these gangs or are ineffective against them. Corruption, impunity, and social inequalities allow such drug cartels to thrive and enforce their brutal codes of conduct outside the law. So while this is a story of an outcry for justice, this is also a story of how state authorities are either hand in glove with or are challenged by criminal networks that act as law unto themselves and normalize impunity and terror against vulnerable communities, particularly women. Surely, at the very least, there is a need to protect those vulnerable from such abuse and ensure accountability. As the world watches closely, the question remains: will there be healing, closure, and change? That's all in this edition of Connecting the Dots. We'll see you in the next episode with more raging issues. Until then, it's a goodbye from all of us in the Delhi newsroom. This is Munmun Bhattacharya signing off. Take care and stay safe.